Hi, everyone. It looks like we still have a few people who might be hopping on, so let's give them about a minute and then we will get started. Okay, so if anyone else is still hopping on, I was just saying thank you all for joining us today. I do want to let everyone know that all attendees have been muted upon entering this webinar. That's just to reduce background noise. So if you have a question at any point, just go ahead and share it in the questions box. We are joined today by Amy Baldwin, who is one of the leading experts on student success and engagement. She is also the senior contributing author on our college success book. We also have with us Anthony Palmiato, who is the editorial director of OpenStax. And we'll be talking about teaching college success and first year experience courses online, as many of you are probably preparing to do just that in the coming academic year. Again, if you have questions, just go ahead and put them in that questions box, and we will be trying to get to as many questions as we possibly can through the webinar. And with that, I am going to go ahead and hand it over to Amy to get us started.
Thank you. Thank you, Symphony. Thank you for joining. What I'm going to do is talk through some things to consider for your teaching your online class, and then we'll talk about some specifics in a minute. But if we go to the next slide, it kind of gives you an overview of what we're going to be talking about. So discussing those challenges of teaching online and planning for an online or hybrid course. Perhaps since we are about 5 or 6 weeks out from probably the start of your classes, you may have a better sense of what it is that you are going to do or want to do for the fall. I bet some of you still have no idea. Well, maybe not no idea, but you're not quite sure which strategy you're going to use. So hopefully today you'll get some idea of what you could think about or questions you can ask to make that happen. We're also going to identify some steps for planning an online or hybrid course. So some step-by-step processes that can help you build the best course that you can, and then describe some best practices and considerations for a successful online or hybrid course. So with that, I do want to kind of, address the elephant in the room. And in this case, it's a pink elephant. I don't know what that means exactly, other than it's a crazy time. And I do want to acknowledge the fact that there's a lot of underlying and an undercurrent of kind of maybe even anxiety, but concern about how the fall is going to look and how it's actually going to work. So your plans may be in flux. Right now, my institution, we have a plan in place, but we do know that the next few weeks will determine if we can actually put that plan in place. We're looking at having students come to campus, but they may encounter a variety of different methods of course delivery. So we're hoping that those students get both online and hybrid, and maybe a little bit of face-to-face as well. Your academic term lengths and your seat time may be modified a little bit. I've seen a lot of reports that institutions are choosing to end in-person classes, if we get that far, right before Thanksgiving, and perhaps going online for the rest of the semester. And so you'll want to think about those kinds of things if your institution has made those decisions. Obviously, you'll want to think about the health and safety protocols that may influence your course delivery. At my institution, we are looking at seating charts. We've already done the social distancing of the actual physical classroom, and we're having to layer upon some strategies and protocols to help ensure as best we can the health and safety of the students and the faculty in the classroom. And then of course, campuses, courses, and faculty and students may need to pivot at any time. And so that's for a planner and a control freak like me, this is my most uncomfortable time, but definitely there are lots of things that you can do to prepare yourself and make it a little less stressful for everybody. So the next slide, I want to talk a little bit about what I'm calling post-COVID pedagogy, and I want to make sure that I do understand we're not past this. I just mean that since March or maybe even late February, I think things have changed in terms of our viewpoint on how we teach and how we engage students. And it's not necessarily that any of this stuff is particularly new. I think it's just bringing it to the forefront for us, and we're having to deal with it, hopefully in creative and innovative ways. But I think now that we're in the middle of this pandemic, in higher education, we're really trying to put access and accessibility front and center, knowing full well that our students are not all from a place of privilege, and they're going to need to have certain things in place for them to be successful. We also know that we're going to need to be flexible, and we're going to need to be flexible not only in how we deliver the content, but how we ensure that students engage in it and complete work. We also realize that we might need to decrease unnecessary physical interaction. I have encouraged my faculty in my department to avoid paper transmission as much as possible. So putting things online, using technology for quizzes and interaction, things like that. We also need to be responsive to both student and faculty needs, and those may be changing every day, and that's going to be quite a challenge. We also need to be able to have a course that can drive itself if needed in the short term. So if a faculty member needs to be out for a little bit, at least the course can continue on until somebody can take over that course and help students stay on track. And then the last one's probably the most difficult, because I think we're all struggling with this, but having some mindfulness of the student and faculty's emotional well-being, and being very supportive where we can be, and building in support systems and strategies for students, especially during this process. Faculty too, but students as well. So that kind of gives my overview of kind of why we're doing what we're doing, and why the flavor of this webinar is what it is. So let's talk about student success course guiding principles. Those haven't really changed, even though we're doing this in a new environment with new challenges. And I really do believe in the idea that a student success course, a course like a first year experience course that you're using this book for, is there to engage students. It is there to help connect them, not only to you and their other fellow classmates, but also the resources that are available on campus or through technology. I also think it is partly about applying what they're learning in the context of their courses. So one of the greatest joys that I have is whenever I can teach a student something, time management or study strategy, and then get them to do it in another class, and then they can come back and report how well it worked or what they need to do differently. Definitely finding ways to help students collaborate in a student success course, because that is going to be kind of what they do in all of their courses, and then in future jobs is working in teams and working well with others. That can be a little bit more challenging doing it in an online format. So we'll talk a little bit about that. And then definitely getting them to reflect on what they're learning. That is a big component of our course, is the reflection piece. Getting them to stop, think, and figure out how they're using the information that they're learning and how effective it is. So some other guiding principles are, on the next slide, is helping students increase their college knowledge. That's what this course fundamentally is about. It's also about them improving their self-awareness. A lot of times, first-year students who come in, especially if they're directly from high school, may have a very different view of themselves. They may think of themselves as really strong, effective learners, and that may be true in high school. Doesn't always translate immediately into success in college. And getting them to be aware of that and getting them to develop those skills is really important. And that's that third bullet, which is the refining those academic and personal skills. And a lot of times they come to this class knowing that they need to do that, finding ways to engage them in that process and really build on those skills is really important. And then, of course, a lot of these courses are centered around the resources that are available, whether it's advising, whether it's tutoring, whether it's even health resources. So think about that in terms of what this course is aiming to do. And I think that will lay a nice foundation for then building your course delivery. So a couple of other things to consider are just kind of some of the unique challenges that putting this course online or even in a hybrid format can do. You're going to have to think about how students will manage their time in these environments. And the way that we are going at our institution, our students are going to have no uniformity in how their courses are going to be delivered. And so we have already decided for our course, we call it ACAD 1300 Journeys to Success, that we're going to spend quite a bit of time in helping those students map out a plan to manage their time and their tasks in their other classes, because that's going to be a bigger challenge than normal for students. How will students be encouraged to seek help? We had this conversation in my faculty training yesterday, and fortunately our director who oversees tutoring center and peer coaching told us that she's got websites, she's got people that can come in and guest lecture to show them the resources and how we have translated them to online. How may the hidden curriculum be complicated? By adding another layer of a barrier for students. So students who already probably struggle a little bit with those unwritten rules in the classroom, now we've added an LMS on top of that, getting them to learn how to, videotape themselves perhaps or access videos. All of that we need to think about in terms of how we explain how to do our courses and succeed in our courses. And then just the fact that if a student is not seeing you regularly each week, how are they going to maintain their motivation? How are you going to put into place opportunities for you to help them get motivated or remotivated? Goal setting, another piece of this, helping them develop some goals to get them through this semester. And then we already talked a little bit about those finding and interacting campus resources. It's going to be a challenge, but it's not going to be something you can't do. Just think about it. All right, so let's get into planning your course. So I'm going to share a few models. I shared these in an earlier version of this webinar back in June, and I'm going to tell you, at that time we weren't sure exactly which models we were going to do, and then I'll share with you what we are planning to do. I'm not saying that everybody has to do that, but I do think it might be helpful to hear a specific example. So that next slide shows some of the spectrum of the options. Definitely, these are the ones that my institution was considering. So there was the 100% face-to-face, which we are not going to be able to do where all students are in the classroom. But we can move towards that hybrid area, or we do have the option at my institution to be 100% online, and we define that to some degree as asynchronous, although we have some, excuse me, some opportunities to do some synchronous online courses as well. So some of these examples of hybrid that you may be considering one is an AB schedule, and that is basically having your students, and they are on different days of the week. Maybe you have a Tuesday, Thursday class, and so excuse me, A student group may be accessing some technology to be able to hear the lecture live, but they're doing that away from the classroom, and the B group may be sitting in class with you and then switching that that is really hinges on how much technology you have in the classroom. There's also consultancy groups, which is dividing the class into smaller groups, especially good for those rooms that really have reduced their capacity. So maybe you're only meeting with 5 or 6 or 7 students at a time. And you're basically doing a more kind of a mentor advising model, less about delivering content and more just checking understanding and checking on well-being. There's also 50% online, 50% face-to-face. So most of the content is going online, and then anything that is remaining will be done in some form or fashion in a face-to-face environment. And then, of course, a combination of all these strategies, which is what we are going to do. We're going to kind of pick and choose some of the best parts of it. So the next slide gives you a little bit more information about what I just said, so you can kind of see how that can be split up. We are going to, at my institution, and the next slide gives you a big star next to it, we're going to do the face-to-face consultancy groups, at least initially. So the idea is if in August 20th, which is our first day of class, if we are able to be on campus at that time, a good chunk of our sections are going to use the face-to-face small group consultancy model. And that next slide, slide 11, kind of gets at that. And how we are going to do that is we're going to put all of our course materials through our LMS, which is Blackboard. And so students will be doing that. They'll have a week's worth of material that they have to complete. So we paste it for them. And then we're going to use that face-to-face to either clarify some things, check in on their well-being, do those kinds of things that we might do in an office hour or in some kind of consultation or advising session, just to make sure that students are understanding the material, but also being able to balance everything that they need to do. So that's just one way to do it. That's how we're planning on doing it. All right, so I want to talk about now, after I've talked about some of the models and some of the considerations for teaching online or hybrid, I want to get into 8 steps for planning your online or hybrid course. Some of them are not very sexy. So a lot of times when people want to start right in the content and how am I going to deliver the content, where's it going to go? I'm just going to ask that maybe you back up just a little bit and think of some other things before you get to that point. And maybe you've already thought of these things. But the first step, which is the next slide, gives you a foundation on which to build. And that is, what format does my institution support? So I gave you some examples of what my institution is looking at and where my department is focusing their thoughts on formats. But your institution may have a very different model for you to use or a different spectrum of models. So obviously it's going to be very important for you to check that first and then figure out what your parameters are for you to plan and deploy your course. Your institution may say, hey, if you want to go online, then go online completely. Or you may have a department or department chair that says, you know what, we don't want to have all of our classes completely online, only a certain percentage, or we want to have some face-to-face component. Obviously, you're going to have to figure out what those parameters are and work around those. Probably one of the most important considerations is the technology that your institution has and the support that you have for it. So we easily said, because of the building that we're in, that's no slight to my institution, just didn't have the updated technology for us to do an A/B schedule where students are logging in off campus, or at least not in the classroom, and simultaneously taking the course with the people in the classroom. We just couldn't do it. So other buildings and other departments on our campus can, but we cannot. And then what other challenges may you face deploying those different formats? What are some of the issues that you haven't thought about that could be influencing you which way to go? So the next step, once you have kind of gotten a lay of the land as to what your institution is going to expect of you, is to really think about what you can expect your students to do. And this will depend on what kind of institution you are, what kind of mission you have, what kind of students you normally serve. So a community college may look very differently in terms of what their students can be expected to do versus a private four-year liberal arts school. We are a comprehensive mid-sized university, and we have students that come from all different backgrounds, mostly from the state. And we know that our students often do not have all the technology that they need personally to be successful. And so it's very important for us at our institution that they be on campus if we can, so that they can access that technology that we have on campus. We also have some backup plans if that is not going to happen. How will they be participating in if any face-to-face components? What are you going to expect them to be able to do? Our institution just decided that we are going to require masks and social distancing inside buildings. And so knowing that information already about my classes has already helped me determine how to train my faculty and what to have them expect to be able to do in the classroom. What access to technologies will your student have other than what is provided by the school if they're on campus? Are they primarily phone users? Do they have a laptop? Are they using a Chromebook? All of that information you might need to gather before the semester starts if possible. And then, will COVID-19 protocols affect student behaviors? The short answer to that is absolutely. And then is that going to affect how you run your class? And what technology support will be provided to students? What is manageable and possible? Very, very important to think those things through, especially because you don't want to build a fantastic online course with all these bells and whistles, and you find out that students don't have the bandwidth on their end to be able to participate in all of those things. All right, so the next thing, next part of the steps is to kind of employ backward design principles. So I'm going to walk you through that process in light of the college success textbook and also delivering a student success course. So most of you are probably familiar with backward design. It's not really backwards, right? It should be the way that we always design courses, but we do know that a lot of people love to jump into the learning experiences because those are cooler and more fun to do than actually starting with objectives and then determining assessments. So let's look at the next few steps around that. So asking yourself, this is step 3, what does my course need to accomplish? So going back to your course goals, going back to your learning objectives of the course, and just reminding yourself that regardless of how we deliver this, I still need to meet these goals. One way that we are looking at our course, our ACAD 1300 course, is what are the essential questions do we expect students to be able to answer at the end of the course? So we took our course objectives, we created these questions that connect to them, and then students are actually working on answering those questions all through the semester, and that is their final exam. So that kind of helps us stay in check, making sure that however we deliver this course, whatever method, we're still getting at the essence of what it is that we want them to know. How will you know that students have met the course goals? So thinking about, are they going to be writing about that? Are they going to be demonstrating that? Are they going to be able to discuss it? What do you want them to do? Then thinking about also what policies will you need to support student success? So what in your syllabus, if you have some leeway, what can you do to help them get to those course goals? And you're going to be needing to be especially mindful of that in light of the fact that every week may be a little different in terms of who can access course materials in whatever delivery mode that you are giving them. And that may change on a dime. So I know that's not a pleasant thought to think about, but it's certainly one that you want to build into your process. And then what does your department or institution require for the course? So if there's anything else that your department or institution expects your course to do, think about those things as well. So the next step is, see, we haven't even gotten to planning the course yet in terms of picking out activities. What else do I need to consider? So thinking about if you have the option for face-to-face, and I would even modify this to say face-to-face and or asynchronous, I'm sorry, and or synchronous at the same time. These are just things that I've written down. I'm sure you could probably argue that one item in one column could go easily over onto the other column, but this was part of the planning process for our course. So you can modify this however you like, but these were the questions or the thoughts that came to mind whenever I was planning it. I felt like content on complex material is probably best for face-to-face or synchronous interaction. So some of the stuff that was a little easier, maybe I could record it. I don't necessarily have to be with the student while they're consuming that information, but something that's a little meatier or a little bit tougher to get across may be something that I want to do face-to-face. Clarification of expectations, instructions, and technology may be better served whenever you're able to get in front of students or either face-to-face or synchronously. Definitely getting a visual check of students' understanding. It's very hard to do that whenever you're not seeing them other than looking at how well they're doing on assignments or tests. Collaborative activities seem to be better suited for face-to-face or synchronous interaction. Visual checks on students' well-being. So students may tell you they're doing okay, but actually talking to them and figuring out by asking them additional questions might help you determine if they really are. And then sometimes troubleshooting technology issues, how to upload something, how to access video recording might be easier to do face-to-face. And then those things that are probably better served online, surveys, quizzes, tests, if they're not high stakes, content dissemination, slides, notes, assigned readings, definitely assignment submission. There's no reason for us at our institution to stand there and get a paper from a student. They can easily submit that online. And then obviously additional video, audio content, and any pre-recorded lectures. So think about those things and how to, if you have the option for any kind of face-to-face or hybrid format, what would you put in that face-to-face component? All right, so the next step is some other things. And this is something that we've created at our campus. It's a backup plan. So even if we are face-to-face, what would happen if we had to take some of those elements and put them online? So that next slide kind of gives you an idea of how to pivot should you plan your course. And yeah, you can go ahead and show that. Next slide. If you had to pivot from all those wonderful things you were going to do face-to-face, now I've got to put them online. So notice that a lot of these elements can be done through conferencing tools. And I think it's not going to be a heavy lift for a lot of students to be able to pivot if they need to. Of course, the more information you provide them, the better. And do remember that your LMS may have some synchronous tools already built in. We use Blackboard, so I'm familiar with Blackboard Collaborate. We've used Google's Meet, which is that video conferencing, and we've also used Zoom for our students. So again, even if you have to pivot, there's still an opportunity for you to continue with the course and have some continuity to some degree without sacrificing too much quality. All right, so let's look at the book itself. So if you're not familiar with the table of contents, I do recommend that you go to it and explore. It is not rocket science, college success content. It pretty much has not changed much in the last 20 years that I've been teaching it. So the chapters cover probably just about almost every course objective you might have. I do want to make a note that chapter 9 I'm particularly excited about. It's understanding civility and cultural competence. it is so it is such of the time, I guess. If you are coming back to campus and you're going to be talking about kind of the recent events and protests and political issues, and definitely the idea of, inclusion and diversity and civility, that chapter in particular will be very, very helpful to you. So, all the other chapters, you're going to see a lot of updated information, research-based information, but I don't think you'll see a lot of surprises in the content. So I do want to talk about, on the next slide, some of the features that I think could be really, really helpful to you if you're going to be delivering this as a hybrid or online course. So within the online text, there is a student survey that students can do directly whenever they access it online. So it can provide you with information on how they're feeling about the topics. So it's a great kind of opener for discussing what the chapter's about, but also their relationship to the content in the chapter. Every chapter has a student profile of a real student who is talking about working through some of the challenges of the chapter's topic. The What Students Say feature is another great, almost live survey. It will update every so often, but when students actually answer the questions, it'll show how they compare to everybody else that has taken the survey. Questions to consider is just a great way for students to ask themselves questions before they start reading the different sections. And then the analysis question, application, and activities, those are the ones that we have done on our campus a lot of modifications and putting them into Blackboard. They're great to use either if you're face-to-face, you can do them asynchronously, or you can assign them to students and have them do on their own. But just know that you've got lots of resources already embedded in the chapter that is already accessible to the student, and that you could easily use to get students engaged in the content, and you have to do very little to get them to do that. The Get Connected, Summary, Career Connection, Rethinking, and Where Do You Go From There, all of those are additional resources that can be helpful to the student as well. So let's look at kind of how you may want to organize that content. You could easily go chapter by chapter and just, if you've got 15 weeks, you take a little bit of time at the beginning of the semester, a little bit of time at the end of the semester for getting students to know each other and do the final exam, and then do week by week, chapter by chapter. I'm going to suggest looking at grouping things by units so that students can kind of see how they are progressing through the course, and it just makes it a little bit, I think, tighter and easier to manage, at least for me. I do recommend that you look at week by week pacing, and strongly encourage you to do that, especially if you're completely online, because that is the way students often organize themselves when they're taking online classes. And obviously, if you're wanting to do kind of a modular approach where students can complete things in a module at their own pace, that's fine. But I do know for time management purposes, a lot of students really appreciate, what do I have to do this week? Let me check that off the list, and now I can go to my next class and do the same thing. So lots of availability, lots of available resources in the instructor's resource manual on how to do that. All right, so the next slide kind of gives an example of a learning module organized by week. So this is a course that I'm teaching, or actually building this summer, and also teaching it this summer. And this is how I've organized it through our LMS. They get a start here first, so it tells them exactly what they're doing all week. It is organized in the order that I want them to do the work. So the first piece of it is that survey that comes from the book. So I'm asking them to explain, in this case, how they feel about meeting the expectations of college. I've actually built in a pre-test from the test bank that's part of this instructor's resources, so that they could just check their understanding of the content before they even get in it. I also am providing guided notes, so it is something that they can use, download, as they read the chapter. And then you'll see at the very bottom of that screenshot, there is a link directly to chapter 1 for the OpenStax book. So there's no excuses that they don't have their book, they can't find their book, they're not sure how to complete the reading assignment. It's already built in there. So one example of how you could do that. So let's look at the next slide in terms of what to expect students to be able to do. So step 6 to me is thinking about how to organize the class in before, during, and after. So a traditional class that you met face-to-face 3 times a week, you may have expected them to prepare before they got to class by reading the assigned reading or doing something on their own. And then you probably focused on a lecture or an activity or something related to the assigned reading or content before class. And then probably after class or at the end of that week, you expected them then to go back to the material, study it, rewrite notes, or maybe even complete an assignment and be prepared to turn it in. So if you think of that as the typical way that we plan our courses, I'm just going to help you think through then how do I do that in a hybrid or online format. So that next slide gives you an example of this. So I may, if it's week 1, chapter 1, I might ask them to take the chapter survey, which you saw an example of. I might ask them to complete a pre-test, and then I might ask them to read chapter 1 and complete guided notes. So that is something that I'm going to put in my LMS. It is, it's got due dates on it, and then whenever we get to either be face-to-face or synchronous, then I'm going to delve deeper into the course content. I might select certain things that I want to focus on, and I will do that during our regular class time. If I can't be face-to-face with them, then I'm going to be doing it through some kind of video conferencing software at that time so students can hop in and listen and participate. Also may give them opportunity to practice applying the information, just like I would have done if we were face-to-face and we were able to do activities where students could collaborate with each other. And then after that class is over, I'm going to remind them that they still need to work on the content. So they might have to complete a short assignment. They might have to write a journal entry. We love journal entries in our course because they're great for reflection. And then they might need to complete a post-test for that. So that next slide kind of highlights that piece of it that I think is really important for developing a hybrid or online class. It could be very easy for you to upload the stuff in Blackboard or any LMS for the before and after. It's sometimes we're not sure, okay, now how do I get them to do the thing that we usually do during class? And here's some examples. I'm going to give you some examples of what you could be doing and how that might look. So that next slide shows you kind of a plan. This is what you will learn this week that I referenced earlier in the screenshot of my class. So it breaks it down for students as to what they need to be doing before you attend a class in person, participate in a synchronous class meeting, or review pre-recorded materials. So it's basically giving them kind of a pacing guide, so to speak, for how to work through the material. We don't want them to go all the way through, or at least I don't, until they have had that kind of touch point, which is normally reserved for face-to-face. So the middle part of that document just lets them know that they may be attending class, they may be participating in a synchronous class meeting, or if we cannot do that, they may be reviewing some pre-recorded material. And once they have done that, then they can do the remaining items in the learning module or in the course shell. And just as a side note, you'll probably notice that I've got at time estimates for everything for the course. I really encourage you to think about, and it's not a hard, fast science, but putting some time elements to all of the things that you're asking them to do, it just will help students plan their time a little bit better, and they'll be less frustrated. So if they think something's probably only going to take them 20 minutes and it really is kind of complex and it may take an hour, then they may get a little frustrated that they didn't think about planning more time to do that. And so that's always a good helpful tip for you. So some other ways to look at this is to, oh yeah, keep on going, is to think about designing this in a more, I guess, organized and strategic way. So I gave you some examples of what you could be doing, but I do want to encourage you, it's a little time consuming, but I think it's well worth it, using some kind of planning grid. Now, this is something our Center for Teaching Excellence provided for us, and I'm just showing you an example of kind of how we thought through all of the things that we needed to be putting in place for our online course. Thinking about what are your objectives for the week or the unit, figuring out how students are going to get the content that you provide, what kind of interaction are you expecting them to do. For our institution, we're really encouraged to have a lot of student faculty and student interaction. So we have to think about those things whenever we're planning our course, and what LMS tools we're going to use. So if you want to get really organized and a little anal retentive about it, this is a great way to plan it out and plan it out all in advance before you start building it in your course. Another way to look at that is the next slide. It gives you a little bit more. So this is our unit on student transitions, week 1, chapter 1, and you can kind of see the different objectives that are being met, the different ways students are getting content, and also what they're being asked to do. So if you're building your class completely online, this is certainly a great strategy to do it. But also, as that next slide shows you, even if you are doing hybrid, this plan, and by the way, you can email me after this and I'll give you copies of the blank document and also these examples if you'd like to try this on your own. So this is an example of those first 2 unhighlighted rows are things that are going to be in Blackboard that students have to do, and then that highlighted row is actually things I'm going to do whenever I get to be face-to-face with the students. So same process, just using the hybrid as part of the planning process. So how does that look back to our previous format? So once you have figured out, the planning, what you want students to be doing, what kind of content do you want to cover, all of that kind of stuff, you may then be able to make that decision if it's not already made for you, what the format is. So here's an example of something that we are able to do on our campus is, again, guiding students to what they're doing, quote unquote, before class. And then it's very clear as to what I need to prepare for a face-to-face meeting, if we get to do that, or a synchronous meeting if I have to use a video conferencing. And then what I expect students to do after class. So just an example of what could be possible. Now I want to show you a couple of actual screenshots of things that we have used in our course. So this goes to more of a completely online asynchronous model. This is content that I captured. I did a lecture. Obviously, I don't have a life because I did this on July 4th, but I talked through the PowerPoints and I recorded this lecture, and it was something that I then put in my online course shell. So students got to go through the content, everything before class. They then watch this as class. Some of the drawbacks are that it's not very interactive. So I'm talking to myself and that's it. But it does provide audio and video and kind of gives some more engaging way of kind of getting information. The next slide shows a different way to do this. I use Blackboard Collaborate, but you could use Zoom or Google Meet, works as well. But I've got a but, ... I'll talk about that in a minute. This allows students to come into the classroom just like they would be in a Zoom call or Google Meet. They just log in. You can then again share slides, talk, record it, and students can then watch the recording of it. If not everybody shows up, then the students that didn't show up can always view it as if and they didn't really miss a class. The students that did show up and listen to it, want to go back and listen to it again, can do that as well. It is somewhat interactive. It's not as easy as what I'm going to show you in the next slide, but it can help you with that during class moment. And again, you can use other video conferencing to have the same effect on it. All right, so the next during class is something that I'm not going to talk a whole lot about, but I just want to show you. This is Top Hat, and we are using Top Hat to deliver our during class sessions. One of the reasons why we're using it is it eliminates the need for paper. I can ask students questions embedded in the slide presentation. They can answer. I can take attendance, and I can also assign this to students after the fact if they weren't able to attend the live session. I can do this face-to-face, and I can also do it asynchronously. So another option, gives you a little bit more interaction, and it definitely can be another way to deliver that. So the next slide just shows you what Top Hat looks like. I just took our college success PowerPoints, uploaded it in. The next slide shows you that I created a question that then is projected on the screen. If students are face-to-face, they can see it and answer it with any electronic device that they have with them, a phone or laptop or tablet. And then the next slide shows you the actual question, and then I can watch students answer. And then I have real-time data as to their comprehension for that. All right, so that gives you an idea of, hopefully, kind of some planning processes that you, and some questions that you might need to think about before you start building anything. Additional considerations for teaching online and hybrid. Here are just a few slides that I want you to think about. The next slide kind of gives you some best practices for your upcoming academic year. As much as you can, create a clear organizational structure for your course so that students have an idea of what to expect. Really, really important that they know, especially if you're going to have to pivot, that they have some kind of assurance that there's a plan in place. If you can, build everything online ahead of time. I told all of my faculty, and I'm doing the same, I'm building the entire course out as an online course. And then if we get to be face-to-face, or I get to do synchronous sessions, then I will just take out that piece of it and deliver that synchronously or face-to-face. This is really difficult to say this. This did come up in our training yesterday with my faculty. Identify a faculty partner who could teach your course in your absence. Having a backup plan that involves somebody that knows your course well enough or knows how to deliver it can be very helpful to you and your department chair. Create flexible policies, as students may find their situations can change quickly. So think about what you're going to do if students cannot access the course for 2 weeks. How are you going to proceed and help them or support them? I've said it before, I'll say it again, help students manage their time and tasks. That's going to be particularly challenging for first-year students. And if you are able to provide any content, technology, or personal support, do that. If not, send them to the appropriate institutional or professional resource. And then one of the things that we've done at our campus is started asking for help. We have a fantastic Center for Teaching Excellence. We have a lot of seasoned faculty who've done a lot of cool things, and our department is now sharing those things out so that we can steal the best ideas and help each other for sure. So some other things to think about, it includes the items on the next slide, which developing community. One of the things that my faculty are really concerned about is creating a community and engaging students, because we know we can do that in the classroom, and we know that um, this course, more than others, really feeds off that kind of strategy. So it's not going to be easy, just going to tell you that. It's going to take some creative ideas, but here are some of them that might be helpful to you. Find a way to co-create shared community standards. Ask students on a discussion board or through email, or if you're face-to-face initially, ask them to come up with some standards for engaging in the class, interacting, and collaborating with each other. Share information about your students and your goals, experiences, and unique characteristics. If they don't get to see you in person and all your colorful glory, then find ways to put that in your online course and ask students to do the same. That will help tremendously, putting names and faces together. Provide opportunities for students to share appropriately, so finding ways to get them to communicate with each other, and definitely, if you can't be face-to-face or synchronous, being creative about how to do that. We are planning on dividing our students into accountability teams. So even though we're doing the consultancy model, we're going to think of those as consultancy and accountability teams, so that they move through the course with a select group of other students that they can develop deeper relationships with. Obviously, we've talked about providing synchronous meetings. If you can, I've done some of those this summer, even though my class is asynchronous. And when a student shows up for one, I get really excited. But I record those and then allow students to watch them later. And then another thing, if you're brave, deploy some anonymous surveys to ask students about their needs, concerns, levels of engagement, suggestions for improvement. And you might want to sprinkle that throughout the semester. When we pivoted in March, I asked my students through a survey, what is your biggest challenge? How is your technology? Tell me any personal information that you want to share that might help me help you succeed. And those kinds of surveys can be helpful to you to make some adjustments. All right, so we're coming into the home stretch, just a couple of more suggestions, and then we have some time to answer any questions if there are any. Developing community online, I already talked about sharing personal stuff. I try to do it visually. So if you can do a video or audio or some kind of PowerPoint, that can be very helpful. And then last but not least, another way to help with kind of engagement and getting students to know each other is finding ways to put them in group projects or activities, or just even getting them to do some tasks together. And there are lots of different ways you can do that. I can tell you, especially if it's asynchronous, it's going to be difficult. But I do think that if you kind of give them some instruction on how best to do that, and giving them opportunities to practice those skills and giving them feedback to monitoring how well they're doing, that can really help them feel more connected to the class. Whew. All right, so Symphony, that last slide I think has my contact information. Feel free to email me if you want some examples, more examples of everything I shared. But tell me if there are questions. Have you seen anything that I could answer?
Yes, so I think your presentation was extremely thorough, and most of the attendees seem to agree because we don't have many questions. But one that has come in just a moment ago is, it's for you, and it is, what is an effective due date policy, and how do you encourage students to get their work in on time?
Oh boy, yeah, the $1 million question. So I am, okay, I have a little ambivalence for this. So I'm pretty much a stickler to due dates. But what I try to do is get them to give me something by the due date. And then I usually add a couple of, recovery assignments. I don't like to call it bonus, but that's basically what it is, to where if they've stumbled along the way, that they can then do something in addition to be able to help their grade. I personally find it difficult to move due dates on students or go, okay, well, just as long as you turn it in within 2 days or something like that. So I just try to find a little space at the end of the semester or shortly after things don't get turned in that allows them to either turn it in again or turn it in for the first time, I guess, or do something else that could help them. Also badger them, remind them, which actually does help them. I know we're trying to wean them off of expecting people to tell them when to turn things in, but I think in this kind of environment, we might need to be a little more supportive.
Great, that's a good point. I wanted to see if Anthony had anything that he wanted to add in. If you have a question, please share it in the questions box. We only have a few minutes left and want to get to as many questions as possible. Anthony, did you have anything on the resources or accessing the book or anything like that?
Sure. Yeah. Thanks everybody for joining, and thanks so much, Amy, for that great walkthrough. And I know it's such a changing time. Amy mentioned a lot of different resources that you could, generate yourself, use from our partners or even non-partners on the different technologies you can use. We just published the book in the late spring, and we put out the initial ancillaries, which I think are very good and quite robust. Amy's instructor's manual, the test bank, the PowerPoints, and so on. We'll be deploying course shells in Blackboard, Canvas, D2L, and Moodle. Those will be relatively, they're not going to be end-to-end courses, like, for example, having what Amy showed, the before class, during class, after class. We're not going to have content necessarily pre-built for all of those, but we will include as much as we can, links to the book, the ancillaries, and so on. Beyond that, as we distribute our books and people start using them, a community often does form, and we both learn what else we might need to produce. Amy's been very vocal on that as well as the other authors and the editors. And we also see a sharing take place. This book has a hub on the OER Commons where we'll see some material be shared, and we will continue to add more material as we see it, as we see the needs arise. And maybe there's a new video set or some sort of curated resource list that we could provide, or maybe there's something we could build from scratch. Those things will all come together, and I would just say, even after, if you're going to plan on using the book, keep checking, with us or checking the instructor's site or the OER Commons hub, even after the semester starts for new materials. We'll probably release them in stages. We'll start off with the semester, what we have. Maybe right before spring semester, we'd see some another sort of release of resources if we can get our hands on them or develop them, and so on. So we understand that you're not just adopting a book, and that it's it's a complex course to teach, and that of course this semester the needs are changing. So just please be vocal with us. Ask. Our customer service department is available to answer any questions, and they do take. They're not DJs, but they take requests. So if anything comes across that becomes a big need, we'll do our best to fulfill it.
And Symphony, you had told me earlier that somebody was interested in copies of syllabuses as examples. Is there a way for people to share what they're doing?
Yeah, so actually, I'm glad Anthony brought up the OER Commons Hub. There's an instructor who's going to finish up her syllabus for this course. I believe it's her first time teaching the course, and she's asking others to share their syllabi just to get some ideas circulating as we go into this uncertain school year. So you can do that on the OER Commons Hub, and I added the link to that in the chat. Let me see. We've only got a little bit less than a minute left, and I don't think we have any more questions.
Wow.
But I will put, Amy, your email address back up on the screen for anyone that might have questions pop up. We did have a few people ask towards the beginning of the webinar if we would be sending out a recording, and we will. Just give us about 24 hours for that to process, and then you'll get it in your email inbox.
Yeah. Excellent. Well, good. Either I bored them to tears or I answered all their questions and they have none. So I'll take the latter as what happened. But obviously, I can send you all kinds of things that I've created, and I will get on the OER Commons and share as well. And I hope you will too.
Thank you, Amy. Thank you, Anthony. And thank you everyone for joining today's webinar. Amy, your presentation was fantastic and very helpful. With that, we're going to go ahead and end the webinar.
Thank you so much. Y'all have a good day.